Welcome to Miami Vice City, the land where some of the most infamous trappers and smugglers operated, spreading generations of flour throughout Florida and the rest of the US. In this Traptree City documentary, we're going to travel through the peak decades of production and distribution of the illicit market up to the modern era of decriminalization. It's a culmination of Miami's rich history from the underground. Make sure to like button, make sure to subscribe, follow us on the social medias, links are down below in the description. Anyways, this is LMC. Let's run it. Most stories of the golden era of flour smuggling really start with the counterculture movement within the US. However, with Miami, many outside influences directly impacted the city into becoming one of the powerhouse hubs of illicit flour distribution throughout America. Starting with the Colombians during the 1960s, Colombian flour became extremely popular among Americans due to the quality. The Colombians were producing crops far superior to domestically grown flour in the US. Their plants had higher potency, stronger aromas, and visually the most superior in comparison to American growers at the time. With the counterculture movement creating skyrocketing demands for the plant, the expensive development of Colombian smuggling routes and distribution networks provided a key resource for consumers. Miami in particular became a primary entry point for their flour shipments to take advantage of its proximity to South America and its extensive coastline. For large shipments, hidden compartments in the commercial cargo shipments were used, while mules or individuals transporting smaller quantities on a smaller vessel or private planes. These traffic routes would eventually lay the foundation for the extent of underground operations into the 70s, 80s, and beyond, and still used to this day, really. Now, before we get on with the video, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor, GoPack. Now, GoPack is a really dope, kind of fashion-forward, smell-proof, on the go rolling kit / bag that allows you to roll up whenever you need to. And it's got all different types of utilities. It's got, a built-in rolling tray. It's got, a poker. It's got, snipping, trimmers. It's got all different types of things that I haven't even mentioned. And it's great for being on the go. If you travel a lot, I highly recommend the GoPack. I've been using it a lot. There's multiple different sizes, right? And if you want to support the channel, you need to go to gopackstation.com. That's gopackstation.com and use my discount code LMC10. It's gonna give you 10% off your entire order. And like I said, I highly recommend these bags. These are amazing to travel with, especially, if you're going into places where maybe smell is an issue. But go to gopackstation.com, use my discount code LMC10 and get 10% off your entire order. Shout out to GoPack for sponsoring this video. Now let's jump back into the video. The Colombians weren't the only players in Miami. Flour from Cuba was making its way into Miami on the backs of refugee immigrants fleeing Fidel Castro's communist regime. The Cuban community began to grow in Miami alongside the illicit market as Cuban dealers were able to capitalize on their connections with the immigrant community and networks throughout Miami. Many of the Cuban smugglers were familiar enough with the local maritime routes to expand operations from the Caribbean and South America directly into Miami. Now, by the end of the 60s, the counterculture movement had reached new heights with dedicated events and festivals celebrating hippie culture and the flour that came along with it. In 1968, the Miami Pop Festival kicked off a year before the launch of Woodstock. The festival consisted of 2 separate concert events with 2 days in May and 3 days in December, with both events bringing together around 120,000 people. This included acts like Jimi Hendrix, Joni Mitchell, Marvin Gaye, and Fleetwood Mac. The success of the festival led to future events like the first ever Woodstock, which put a positive spotlight on hippie culture in the mainstream. However, months later after Woodstock's success, the Palm Beach International Music and Arts Festival, just 70 miles north of Miami, held one of the most disastrous events up to that time. The temp dropped into the 40s as people tore down outhouses to use as firewood to warm themselves up. With around 40,000 in attendance, there were 130 overdoses with 130 arrests made. And you think about the Fire Fest, that seems like a really bad Fire Fest. So by this time, Jamaican flour is becoming more and more prominent in the streets, with Cubans pushing the product. And with the increased black market activity came increased corruption and law enforcement. December 5th, 1969, Inspector Francis Napier, a 31-year old veteran of the Miami PD, was arrested while on duty with his involvement in a $100,000 a week flour racket. That same night, one of his partners was detained for having 400 pounds of flour in his car, with another partner being nabbed the next morning at a warehouse where they stashed 1,000 pounds of Jamaican-grown flour. And this turned out to be the biggest bust in Miami history at the time. Now, entering into the 1970s, the Medellin cartel, led by Pablo Escobar, was most famous for his coke trade. But he was also a major player in the flour trade as well. And this is when Santa Marta gold, or Colombian gold, was becoming more known in the community as the world's most sought-after flour. With peak demand and a near monopoly on top quality supply, Colombian smugglers were receiving more funds and resources than ever to move flour into Miami's port and other major hubs in the US. And this introduced the use of vessels beyond aircrafts or boats as they moved into semi-submerged and fully submerged vessels, submarines. These were basically submarines meant for direct transport of flour from Colombia into the seaports of the US. Some are equipped with the state-of-the-art GPS and tracking systems, along with stealth tech with low noise propellers and low profiles that make them near impossible to see or detect at night. To this day, it's hard to judge how many of these vessels are consistently operating, as they are some of the most difficult to detect. But as the decades have gone on, more and more have been caught in the waters off the coasts of both South and North America, showing that this is something that has continued to develop as time goes on. Now, before we go on, please make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and definitely check out all the other videos if you haven't watched them. Follow me on all the other social medias to stay up to date on new LMC content. And yeah, links are down below in the description. I really appreciate you guys for rocking with me. All right, now let's get back to the history of Miami's trappers and smugglers. So Star Island. The smuggling into the Miami market was the beginning to ramp up from pounds to tons. Jamaican flour was becoming more and more popular as equally potent alternatives to Colombian grown crops. Perhaps none made more of a direct impact on Jamaica's flour market than Thomas Riley, aka Brother Love. Along with his preacher friend Edward Sega and the members of their Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church of Miami Beach. Well, definitely check out that full breakdown of Brother Love and the Coptic Church. There's actually a whole video I did on them. It's linked down below in the description. But basically, Thomas Riley brought a group of Americans to Jamaica, claiming that they were in search of God and flour. They eventually amassed a movement with the people of Jamaica who looked at Riley as a figurehead that was bringing a positive change to the community. They eventually grew the Jamaican flour market into an international player where they moved their thousands of acres of flour product into the US market through Miami. They set up a church on Star Island, which is one of the most prominent islands in Miami, just off the coast of Miami. So 43 Star Island became the Miami Beach home to wealthy flour smugglers who openly consumed and touted their immunity from US laws due to their religious protection. This even led to their own shipping company that moved freighters of flour that were constitutionally protected by their religion at the time, which might make this the most high-profile gray market mover in history with international clout. However, in 1979, Dan Rather's CBS Evening News report would air a video showing youth members of the Coptic Church partaking and playing in smoke-filled rooms. The result had top-ranking members of the church indicted for smuggling of over 100 tons of flour. Thomas Riley faced 15 years but served 12 after being released in 1994, but is definitely, I would call him the Pablo Escobar of flour. By far the biggest, operation ever. Now, at the same time, the Colombians were still ramping up production and distribution. Robert Planchorn and Robert Meinster were leaders of the media-dubbed Black Tuna Gang. They were named after their code word Black Tuna, which was actually packaged flour. They were indicted for what was described as the biggest and slickest smuggling operations in history. They moved over 500 tons of Santa Marta gold throughout the 70s, and many times they operated directly out of the presidential suite of the Fontainebleau Miami Beach. They were eventually caught directly due to the first ever venture between the FBI and CIA. Now, Planchorn was sentenced to 64 years and was actually released in 2008 after serving 28 years. Now, the Black Tuna Gang employed highly skilled and knowledgeable fishermen like Raymond Stansel. Now, Stansel had a fair sense for control over boats under extreme ocean conditions. Plus, his in-depth knowledge of the various seaways, inlets, and ports of Florida's coast made him more than formidable against law enforcement. However, Stansel worked independently, moving shipments into Florida from both Colombia and Jamaica. He was able to bring in massive amounts of Colombian gold from the shores of Santa Marta, Colombia, back to the southern Florida region within 10 days of sea travel. From Jamaica, he brought in shipments of 50-pound burlap sacks, which only took 5 days of sea travel. Word began spreading among the other fishermen with stories of $175 pounds being sold with $165 worth of profit. Stansel was a pioneer of the trafficking labyrinth that the multitude of inlands provided the future generation of smugglers in the 80s in Florida. It took law enforcement years to finally realize the true amount of flour that was being moved into Miami and its network in southern Florida. But after only 2 operations in 1974, more than 200,000 pounds of flour was seized, marking the territory as one of the nation's highest trafficked smuggling routes. Now, Stansel's story doesn't have a typical ending. In 1974, after being on law enforcement radar, he made a trip out to Honduras to go scuba diving on New Year's Eve. Things appeared to go wrong during the trip where he was pronounced dead without a body being recovered. However, a traffic accident in Australia in 2015 revealed that he not only faked his death, but had lived a completely alternate life after moving to Australia and starting a family with a wife and now 2 kids. He was fatally killed in this accident, unfortunately, revealing his long-lost identity as one of the most prolific flour smugglers during the golden era of smuggling. Now, again, when it comes to easy and convenient transport during your travels, the sponsor of this video, GoPack, has you covered. Now, GoPack, like I said, is a fashion-centric, smell-proof bag that allows people that like to partake to be able to travel on the go. Now, GoPack is a bunch of different designs while having a multitude of different compartments, like I mentioned earlier. And if you want to support this channel, and you also want to get one of these amazing packs, you can go to gopackstation.com and use my discount code LMC10 to get 10% off your entire order. Now again, use my code LMC10 to get 10% off your entire order at gopackstation.com. Big shouts out to the homies over at GoPack. Now, let's jump back into the content. The 1980s. Like I said, Robert Stansel was a pioneer for the future black market trade into Miami. Cartels and criminal organizations were now actively looking for their next Robert Stansels that could evade law enforcement and quickly move heavy shipments internationally. Well, the US government inadvertently gave the cartels exactly what they were looking for when the feds banned commercial fishing in the Everglades National Park in the 80s. This almost completely dried up the Everglades city economy, also known as the 10,000 Islands, just 85 miles west of Miami. And for the most part, the town relied on the fishing and crabbing industry for most of its income. Now, without jobs, many of the fishermen had no use for their boats or skills on the water. Besides, now they were seen as criminals if they were to do so, something that they were already formally paid to do, which is pretty crazy. Now, with Robert Stansel leaving the docks without any ice or coolers for fish and empty nets every time he returned, word got around quick that the new move was to switch from trapping crabs to trapping flour. Now, the saltwater cowboys. The tactics to move flour into the US had also switched up. Instead of having vessels transporting product continent to continent, single pilot planes were being used to speed up the trip and ultimately avoid detection through the long journey by sea. Before Barry Seal became infamous for his powder smuggling with the Medellin cartel, he was originally transporting flour. Eventually, when he realized he could make a greater profit on powder, he fully transitioned, just like most of the Colombian dealers, right? But however, there were many of these more pilots who routinely took advantage of the new fleet of jobless fishermen than were ready for a new income stream, especially if they were going to be treated as criminals, whether they used their boats for illicit fishing or for the illicit trade. The Everglades city became directly tied to the international flour trade into Miami and the rest of the US. Planes would be flying in loads from Colombia and they would drop directly into the water below. This flour quickly became infamously known for its shape, its coloration, and overall quality. For those who remembered brick flour, this is the process that led to its production and widespread distribution. Now, the brick flour. The most popular method to transport large quantities of flour was to condense it using trash compactors, which would neatly spit out perfectly cubed bricks that were placed in brown burlap sacks. kind of similar to a vacuum seal if they did it wrong, but that's obviously not exactly what I'm talking about. Now, these became known in the industry as square groupers, right? That's the name, why it comes from there. Literally being square packages that were fished out of the waters of the coast by newly recruited black market fishermen that were no longer allowed to fish. This process would greatly degrade the flour by crushing the plant and dropping into the sea where it soaks up seawater, sometimes awaiting retrieval in the hot sun, as these operations extended day and night while relying on the craftiness of the fishermen to evade law enforcement. After retrieval, the flour would then be moved into Miami's major hub, or even vice versa. Everglades City had a single landing strip where planes have literally been landed and abandoned, or even purposely crashed and left behind. The payout for some of these pilots were great enough for them to make that drop and escape with their payday without care of what happens to their plane. It was easier to avoid capture, knowing that if law enforcement had them on their radar, they would likely be waiting for them at the airstrip. Now, Operation Everglades. At its peak in the 80s, it's estimated that around 75 tons per week, 150,000 pounds, was being moved, which prompted Operation Everglades, a 2-year investigation that led to the arrest of 28 people in a community of only 600 people, in addition to 300 more arrests in the surrounding rural area. Hundreds of fishermen boats were confiscated, and backbone of the legal and black market economy of the area. What started as a 90-day investigation to scout out Miami's black market hub eventually turned into an indefinite stay, leading to the formation of the Fort Myer Task Force, which is in operation still today. Local police reached out when they started calculating up to 20 pounds in a single night from cargo ships moving in from South America, in addition to a single 50-ton bust with over 1,000 square groupers counted. After these seizures, law enforcement would create a fire stack to burn the flour. It would consist of wood, the flour itself, and then a layer of diesel fuel. Believe it or not, this is where the original term diesel came from for flour heads. Smugglers routinely would go into these burn stacks to retrieve any flour they could salvage and put back into the market. This isn't the first time Florida has decided to douse these plants with chemicals. In 1983, Florida decided they would begin spraying any flour fields they discovered with paraquat, a toxic herbicide, which the US also persuaded Mexico to use on their fields as well. However, this didn't stop growers from continuing to ship their tainted flour into the US. Tim McBride. Around this time, Colombia was providing the US with over 40% of its flour, with a majority of it coming through Tim McBride and his saltwater cowboys. Tim's crew of fishermen worked directly with smaller crews and several large Colombian criminal organizations. After Operation Everglades, 80% of the male population had been taken into custody, and many of which were part of McBride's overall operation. According to the retired police captain Tom Storer, this had a generational impact where the children who grew up here saw the government and police as the bad guys who became and took away everyone's job and arrested their dads. It was made apparent to him when he would speak in the area for Kids DARE program, noting the youth's overall dislike and mistrust for the police was pretty apparent. Now, we get into Randy Lanier. Another high-profile case after Operation Everglades was Randy Lanier, a race car driver who became the Indy 500 Rookie of the Year in 1986. However, he funded his career by smuggling flour into the US. He started back in the early 1970s with a Magnum Power boat where he helped unload other boats coming into Florida. Specifically, he was able to make quick trips from the Bahamas with 700-pound loads that he would bring back to sell itself. And from there, the boats got bigger and bigger, along with the massive amounts of flour, as the operation evolved into a $300 million operation, shipping more than 600,000 pounds from Colombia. In October 1986, he was one of the 11 people charged in a Miami federal court by the DEA for engaging in major illicit flour and money laundering operations. The entire operation was unraveled due to a single delivery truck carrying a small quantity of flour that had broken down in southern Illinois and stumbled upon by a state trooper. Now, by the end of the 80s, flour had become the second largest cash crop in Florida, second only to citrus fruits, and with an estimated $400 million a year market. But now, the only place started to move inland into Miami indoor grow operations that often cut out the cartels altogether. What started off as a simple neighborhood home operations had evolved into the large-scale illicit market operations that we've seen in states like Oklahoma, where foreign entities are scooping up real estate. And definitely go check out that Oklahoma Trappers video. If you haven't seen it already, it's going to be linked down below in the description. Now, the siblings. One of the largest cash seizures in Miami history had over $20 million discovered in buckets hidden behind the walls of an indoor gardening business called Blossom's Experience. It was run by siblings Luis and Salma Gonzalez. Luis claimed he would make money on the side by teaching others how to grow flower themselves, while authorities claimed he was also growing and selling. According to DEA sources, he broke down his operations, noting multiple grow houses that produced 167 pounds of flower that took several men around 8 hours to process. Now, the indoor growing techniques had evolved far beyond typical soil and nutrients. Hydroponic grow houses were popular and were producing high-grade flower with US borders, directly inside of the major transport hubs like Miami. And these growers had an edge on profits with distribution and higher quality product than the masses of square groupers that invaded the US market. And this gave inland operations more funds to purchase massive suburban homes to flip into state-of-the-art, grow houses. But perhaps the most impressive network of these was inside of Miami's Mall of America. Federal agents confiscated 200 plants, revealing illicit operations with hidden storerooms in Savage Boutique, the Belly Dance Club, and an outlet store called Last Chance. Pretty nuts. Now, one story that turned into a major highlight in our DC Trappers video, which is also linked in the description down below, was about Nicholas Cunningham and his flower brand, the K-Gods. Definitely watch that video to get the full breakdown on how he made his stamp on the DC flower market. But considering, he started in LA, I shouldn't have been surprised to find out he had made moves down south in a city like Miami. He and his partner Simon Mills set up 2 Miami Beach K-Gods clothing shops where he had been accused of trapping flower out of. Now it's a legend, we don't know that for sure, but over a 6-week period, undercover investigators purchased flower at both locations, which actually did lead to his arrest. Now, Ricky Williams, someone I've actually met, great guy. The decriminalization of flower in Florida in 2019 has brought about changes to the stigma that athletes like Ricky Williams, former Miami Dolphins running back, would have appreciated during his time in the NFL, or should we say times. Without breaking down the full timeline, he ended up testing positive for flower 5 times, but since then, he has become a respected speaker and advocate in the community, noting how the plant helped him cope with the pain that comes with the sport of football. And this has led to his own flower lifestyle brand, Heisman, and obviously play on his 1998 Heisman Trophy during the NCAA years. Now, still, international groups in Miami still have a modern stronghold in the illicit market economy. Cuban American organizations based in Miami have spread their grow networks into houses in Gainesville, Jacksonville, and out of state into Georgia and the Carolinas. But let us know in the comments, where would you like the Trap Tree City series to cover next? Let us know down below in the comments. Also, we are in the process of expanding our team. We're looking for content creatives in all departments, from video editors, thumbnail editors, script writers, graphic designers, clothing designers, social media managers, and more. If you're a fan of our videos and feel you have the skills to help grow LMC to the next level, then make sure to follow me on all the social medias and email me with a subject line saying LMC team. Links are in the description. Please include a short cover letter explaining why you would be a good fit, your resume, and online portfolio with links to your previous work. I look forward to possibly working with you in the future. Like I said, contact me either via email or DM. And also, definitely check out what's going on when these shipments move on from Houston into the Atlanta hub in Atlanta's Trap Tree series video by clicking here. Anyways, make sure to support, hit the like button, share this. I really appreciate y'all. Big shouts out to Miami, big shouts out to Florida. Anyways, this is LMC signing out.